consecutive years, 8 years as chairman of the Appropriations Committee, which most followers of the legislature know is key assignment. He served on the leadership team with Tom Murphy for those 20 years. He's very knowledgeable in the workings of the Georgia House of Representatives, and he is very familiar with Tom Murphy. Among my most prized possessions is this book, Mr. Speaker, the biography of Tom Murphy by Richard Hyatt. On the inside flap, there's an autograph. And that autograph says, "To my good friend Bob Shore, hope you enjoy reading about the old man that you helped create." Well, I wish that I could say that I helped create Tom Murphy, but I can't. Tom Murphy created Tom Murphy. He became one of the strongest politicians and speakers this state has ever known. He served for 28 years as a member and as a speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives. That's the longest tenure any speaker has ever held in the history of this country. He served under 8 Georgia governors. I'll list them for you. Ernest Vandiver, Carl Sanders, Lester Maddox, Jimmy Carter, George Busby, Joe Frank Harris, Zell Miller, and Roy Ball. That's 8. I beg your pardon. And thank God he was there during those many years, because his even temperament, even though he's always been accused of being a little tough, is what has kept Georgia ahead of many of the states in this country. So we want to talk about Tom Murphy today. Tom Murphy was born, I'll give you a little of his background since Mike isn't here. He was born in Bremen, Georgia. He was the son of a railroad man who was a primitive Baptist speaker. So he grew up near the cross. He always maintained that type of character. He was tough, he was strong, he was caring, he was willing, but he was a great man. So Tom Murphy, after finishing high school, because his father had instilled in him the work ethic, wanted to become work on the railroad, become a working man on the railroad. But his father instead enrolled him at North Georgia College without his knowledge. So he goes to North Georgia College, he finishes there, and only a few days after his graduation, he joined the United States Navy and served in the South Pacific during World War II. Upon his return to Bremen, he decided to go to law school. So he enrolled at the University of Georgia. He married a very nice sweetheart over in Bremen, and there's a story I can tell you about that. My good friend and golfing partner, Reverend Dr. Randall Williamson, told me this story one time about Tom Murphy. He said that Tom Murphy had just come home from the service and didn't know any young ladies in Bremen because he'd been gone for so long. So Williamson fixed him up with a blind date. And Tom Murphy didn't like her at all, but he liked Williamson's date. So he asked Williamson's date for a date the next night. They went out on a date, and 6 months later, they were married. So that's the story of Tom Murphy meeting his wife. But he went to the University of Georgia, he finished law school there, he came back home to Bremen, and he practiced law with his brother, James, who suffered from an arthritic condition and was confined to a wheelchair. So he and James together practiced law there. James had been in the legislature, and which encouraged Tom to run, and he did. He got elected in 1960. 1960, which strangely enough was the same year that Zell Miller was elected. Those two, from that point on, became very, very, very competitive people against each other. So he got to be Speaker. And after that, Bubba McDonald can take up the story of Tom Murphy much better than I can. So Bubba, let's talk for a minute about the man, Tom Murphy. He was covered by the press as being a tough dictator. Was he that?
Speaker Murphy was a tough presiding officer. You got to understand, when you've got 179 egos in that smoke-filled room back in the early 70s, that it requires somebody with organizational skills. It requires somebody with a strong determination to keep the house in order. And Mr. Murphy was good at that. He was portrayed, as Bob says, by the media. And of course, if I may take you back just a little bit before that, Speaker Murphy was one of the big leaders when Governor Maddox was elected governor by the House of Representatives. And that was when the House got its independence. Prior to that, under the Sanders administration, under the Vanderbilt administration, under the Arnold administration, you can go back, the governor appointed the Speaker of the House. The governor pretty much called the shots on everything. But in that period of time when the state was in limbo between then Bo Calloway, who had run for governor as the Republican nominee, Lester Maddox as the Democratic nominee, and then Ellis Arnold in a write-in campaign. There was no majority vote for anyone. Therefore, at that time, the law required that the House of Representatives elect the governor, and of course, they elected Lester Maddox. In that interim there, though, was when George L. Smith was elected Speaker of the House, and that was the first time that a Speaker had been elected independently by the House of Representatives. And then, of course, Speaker Smith passed away in 1972. Tom Murphy was Speaker Pro Tem at that time, and then Speaker Pro Tem Murphy became Speaker of the House there in 1972 and served until he left the General Assembly. But yes, I had a great friend of mine, a trustee in my church in Commerce, where I was then the Ford dealer, Mr. Joe Hurst, a great guy. And he would always just get on me Sunday after Sunday about why that I like Tom Murphy and why I voted for Tom Murphy to be Speaker of the House. He said he's the most arrogant person I've ever seen in my life. And some people saw that in Speaker Murphy as he presided over the Georgia House of Representatives. But when you sat down with Speaker Murphy, whether you were a member of the General Assembly of Georgia, whether you were someone from Hay Power, or wherever it was, he gave you the time to discuss your issues with him. Unlike so many other office holders of distinction, if you wanted to speak to Tom Murphy, if you would go in his office, and if you sit there long enough, wait your turn, you could see the Speaker. Now, one of the ways that he maintained his loyalty to the Georgia House of Representatives is that if Carlton Caldwell, if you've been sitting in there 45 minutes, and Carlton Caldwell walks in there to see the Speaker about something, as soon as the person that's in the Speaker's office leaves, he's going to see Carlton Caldwell then. He will see the members of the House at the first opportunity that they can visit with. And that kept him very close to each and every member. It didn't matter whether it was Republican or Democrat. If you were a member of that House and you want to see Speaker Murphy, he would see. Then if you were an individual that had an issue that you wanted to discuss with him, and you went in there to see him, you're going to get an answer if you ask him a question. It may not be the answer that you wanted to get, but you can write it back, because that's He was just so frank and so upfront and so plain that you always knew where he stood. You didn't leave there scratching your head wondering whether you made an impact on your position or whatever. He was dead on target, and he would tell you exactly his position on whatever it was. His love, he loved Georgia. Speaker Murphy loved Georgia. He loved every part of Georgia. His humbleness was with the elderly and children. The times that we have seen him go to the well of the house, and didn't go there on just any and every issue, but when he would leave the podium and go to the well of the house on elderly issues or children's issues, he was a very, very sincere and humble person to do that. I had the unfortunate privilege of going to Gracewood in Augusta, to the institution over there, where the most severe handicapped children are. And I was chairman of the Appropriations Committee at that time. And you have the Mongoloid children, and it's just you just can't appreciate life until you visit somewhere like that. And the speaker turned to the superintendent when we were getting ready to leave and says, "Don't invite me back." He said, "I won't come back." He said, "I will not come back. But if you ever need anything from the state of Georgia, just let me know." He said, "It'll be done." And that's Tom Murphy.
You mentioned George L. Smith, who was Speaker, I think, on 2 occasions. How would you compare Speaker Murphy to Speaker Smith?
Well, there were 2 different personalities. My short time with Speaker Smith was Speaker Smith ruled with just a couple of 3 people that he was close to, and they he didn't let his tentacles go out and involve more and more members. And I don't think Speaker Smith was as compassionate as Tom Murphy. George L. ruled with his eyes. And I never will forget a time that we were voting in my freshman year on a pay raise for the members of the General Assembly. And I had told the speaker that I would not vote for it unless it was on the voting machine. We had opportunities at that time you could have a hand vote, or you could record your vote by voting machine. And the machines at that time, you would, when I would push my button, the total would click. And of course, you're looking for 91 votes in order for anything to happen. I've always said it doesn't make any difference how rich you are, how big you are, how beautiful you are, how whatever you are as a member of the Georgia House of Representatives. Unless you've got 91 people with you, your effectiveness is pretty null. It takes 91 people to do anything in that body. But as I watched the speaker, George L. Smith at that time, we were raising the pay of members of the General Assembly from $3,200 a year to $4,700, $4,800, and $5,200. What was it? Do you remember, Colin?
44.
44. Okay, $3,200 to $4,400 a year. And a lot of us had told them, we vote for it if you put it on the board, but we'd be recorded that we voted for it. Didn't want any hidden votes or anything like that. And I watched a particular person in the House that was in a leadership position, very close to then Speaker George L. Smith, stood in front of his desk, and he had voted in the green, voting for it, and right before the vote was, the machine was locked, Speaker Smith cut his eyes to this particular person. His vote was switched. We passed the pay increase by about 4 votes, and this particular person voted nay in the thing. But that was just a different type of leadership role, the difference between a George L. Smith and a Thomas B. Murphy. Mr. Murphy didn't hold grudges long. Didn't say he didn't hold grudges. He just didn't hold them long. Carlton and I experienced a time when a good friend of ours, a very capable person, Al Burns, ran for Speaker of the House. Al was majority leader. And he ran against Speaker Murphy in one of the upcoming terms for Speaker of the House. And it was a brutal fight among legislators for that. Mr. Murphy, of course, won. Al was put back for a couple of years, and then he was brought back into the fold because he was a very capable person, a very smart individual, person with talent that needed to be in leadership role. Brought him back in, and he became Speaker Pro Tem of the House of Representatives. Speaker Murphy recognized a difference in, a lot of people in executive positions, they're afraid to hire somebody that's more knowledgeable of the subject or smarter than they are because they're afraid they'll take their job. Mr. Murphy wasn't that way. He always had confidence in his job, and he knew his job, and he would bring the best out of the best in the House of Representatives. So Denmark Group, one of probably the best constitutional lawyers in the state of Georgia, was a part of the team. But Denmark was a very down the middle, down the road, cut and dry. He would have disagreements with Mr. Murphy on the interpretation of the Constitution. And very frankly, Denmark was right most of the time. And but the Speaker would pull the best out of him in order to have the best perfected bill or constitutional amendment that we could have. I know that when the revision of the state constitution was made, and this was in the Busby administration, and there was a long, hard battle. The Senate position was 15% of the state budget. The debt service could not exceed 15% of the total state budget, and the House position was 10%. And even Busby kind of wanted to lean to the 15%. But Speaker Murphy and Carlton Caldwell's of the world and others, we all stood fast that we were not going to exceed the 10% debt service payments, exceed 10% of the state budget on an annual basis. And that's still in effect today. And that certainly is the greatest thing that can happen for our grandchildren and their children, because that's what's kept the state of Georgia a strong fiscal state. Speaker Murphy was a very, very strong fiscal person when it dealt with the state budget. He wasn't a person that just looked at it from the outside. He was right in amongst it, just digging in on hours after hours after hours when everybody else had gone home, and we had what was then called the Green Door Committee. It was a committee of about 7, 8 people, and Mr. Caldwell over there was one of my members. And we'd dig in and we'd go through that budget, hard times, hard line. And you just look back at the state of Georgia and see where Georgia was when I was elected to General Assembly of Georgia in 1971. The state budget was $1.3 billion. $1.3 billion. And today, just the education portion of the state budget, that's being the public schools and the college and university, the Regents budgets, exceeds $9 billion a year. And but during the 70s and the 80s, Georgia's economic growth continued to just expand. You know what happened, and it was that strong fiscal responsibility that I think that people like Tom Murphy had a position in and was a major player in to make sure that we were a state with AAA bond ratings. And one of the times I was chairman, I went to New York and I picked up a check for $280 million for the state of Georgia. And I walked out of Solomon Brothers with a $280 million. And we had done a refinance on some bonds. And I got to walk out of one building and carry it to another and deposit and put it to work in about 15 or 20 minute time, but at one time, I had $280 million. But that's a kind of a little overlay right there, Bob.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you about the green door, and I'm glad you brought that up. You know, Governor Sanders, when he was in office, very impressed with Speaker Murphy's first term. He saw leadership there. So he appointed him as chairman of the committee, which, as you know, is a good thing for Murphy.
Here again, this is the governor appointing the chairman of the committee,
Right.
not the Speaker of the House appointing the chairman.
But the sad part about it was that Speaker Murphy, who you know is somewhat stubborn, would not vote on one of the governor's bills. So the governor fired him, along with a couple other chairmen who didn't do that. So Speaker Murphy, who's a very bright guy, discovered a method to hold up the legislation that the governor was sponsoring at the time, who was anxious to get out of the House, by standing up and making a motion that the bill be explained to the membership paragraph by paragraph. That was going to take days. So the governor sent Louis Daniel up there to get him. And Murphy goes down and to see the governor, and the lady out front says, "Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Murphy, the governor's busy." And Tom said, "Well, that's fine with me. I didn't want to see him anyhow." But that, nobody knows this, but few people know, but there's a little button that those people can push. It rings a little bell, or it used to be. At least it was when Sanders was governor, because I was there and knew about it. But they rang the bell, and out came the governor. And he looked at Tom Murphy and he says, "Tom, you've made your point." And Murphy replied, "Well, Governor, you know, I want this bill to be understood by everybody in the House, everybody in the Senate, and every citizen of Georgia." And the governor repeated, "Tom, you've made your point." So they go back, they became friends again, and they went on about their business.
It's interesting that Bob tells that story because I had the opportunity to talk to Governor Sanders 2 weeks ago. He was at Sea Island at the time, and we were talking about some things that will happen down the road. And he told me that story. He said, "I taught Tom a lesson."
Well, he might have thought.
But to capitalize on that a minute, as a committee chair, and Carlton was chairman of the Corrections Committee for years and years, and helped go through the time when we met with, and Speaker Murphy and Mike Bowers were about like this, and they just didn't cotton, if you might, in local terms. But we were in there because Georgia was in a crisis. We'd spent hundreds of millions of dollars under a federal court order in Reason, and we were in a crisis on prisons, and we got. Carlton was an instigator in this, got the speaker and Mike Bowers in the speaker's conference room together with 3 or 4 others, and got a ruling from the Attorney General at that time that we could shortcut some construction without going through a major bidding process and contract because of the seriousness of the problem, and build some prisons, and we were able to do that. And save millions and millions of dollars for the taxpayers of Georgia being able to do that. But when the speaker, when it came time to get down what's in the best interest of the state, he laid aside his personal response to others that he might, whether it had been a Republican or, you know, he would do the Republicans like that right there. And at that time, of course, again, and I say this very comfortably, you know, those of us in the 70s and 80s that served in the Georgia General Assembly under the Democratic label, we weren't even close to what is in what I perceive as the Democratic Party in Washington, D.C. today. I mean, I'm a businessman in Commerce, Georgia, in the hardware and building supply business, and I was very conservative in my thoughts and my votes and everything like that. But I also was was very pro-business. Pro-business for the state of Georgia. Example, 1972 was the time when was being thought about at World Congress Center. Well, just think back. Remove the World Congress Center as you see it today from what it is. And in 72, we were talking about spending $30 million for World Congress Center. My wife was a classroom school teacher in Commerce, Georgia. And she was making about $5,200 a year as a classroom teacher. And here her husband, a member of the Georgia General Assembly from rural Georgia, Commerce, Georgia, Jackson County, was walking around supporting spending $30 million of state funds to build a World Congress Center. I'm not sure she even voted me when I had to run again. Speaker Murphy was the one that came down when the bill was being debated on the floor, and we had Watts Larson from Dublin, Georgia, a very articulate attorney that wanted the World Congress Center to be in Dublin, in the middle of the state, and he made a very good case for it as far as spending that money. He just really didn't want the World Congress Center, but if we're going to spend it, he wanted it done in Dublin, Georgia. And Speaker came down one of those times, and he came out as well. Came out and from his place as Speaker Pro Tem and spoke in favor of the World Congress Center. I don't have to tell you what that has done for the economics of the state of Georgia, but that was just the first phase. The second phase was $70 million. The third phase was probably twice that more. And then on top of that, later in time, and this is the real, you said just get it right down to what it really is, didn't you, Bob?
Shell the corn.
Shut it down. Well, on Sunday afternoon in what's called the old Stadium Hotel, as chairman of the Appropriations Committee, I had the privilege of sitting in a meeting with about 12, 13, 14 men one Sunday afternoon, and that's where the Georgia Dome was conceived. Rankin Smith on the Falcons was there, and he was willing to do so-and-so, and there was so much to be doing so-and-so, and the state of Georgia spent $19 million building the Georgia Dome. The rest of it was done being paid for through leases and through ticket sale contracts with the Atlanta Falcons. The $19 million was to clean some hazardous material that was there with the A.O. Smith Paint Company, was down there on that site next to the World Congress Center. Ladies and gentlemen, today, let me tell you what, the Georgia Dome has been a money maker for the state of Georgia. All the SEC championship games and things that have gone there has been one of the strongest economic engines that we've had. But it started, there were 10 men in the Atlanta area that put up $100,000 apiece. Throwing out some names that he's not with us anymore, but he wouldn't mind. Mr. John Williams, the Williams Brother Concrete Company. He was one of them. Mr. John Adderholt, who's still living in Atlanta, and Loudermill, Aaron Reynolds, and these kind of people that stepped up and said they put down $100,000 apiece to guarantee this program to get started and get it kicked off. And in my experience in business, you've got to make an investment in order to make a return. And the state of Georgia has to do the same thing in many ways. And Tom Murphy was always willing to look at every avenue of what type of investment we were going to make. Investment in our children, investment in our educational programs, investment in our university systems, investment in anything, but he wanted to make sure that the investment was going to generate and produce. One of the key issues, and I keep referring back to my friend Carl from Caldwell here, but not because he's here, but it's because he was a major player in it. But Speaker would have thrown me out of the state capitol if I'd have come to him with something in our highway funds that wanted to do a $20 million bond issue for highways in Georgia. We never passed a bond issue that exceeded 5 years on highway, because number one, the highway doesn't last 20 years. And you'd be paying for something that's already worn out and gone. I'm not saying that that's not done today, but I'm just saying it wasn't gonna be done and would not have been done and was not done in the time that I was in the position and the speaker was in the position he was in the State House of Representatives.
You came to the Capitol in 1971.
Correct, sir.
Jimmy Carter was governor.
Yes, sir.
You had an opportunity to work on the reorganization legislation.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker didn't like me that much. He called me one of the disciples of Carter. And that was another disciple of Carter right there, too. There were 13 of us. Elliot DeVittis was one. Sam Nunn was one. Mike Egan, Republican in the House, was one of the disciples. Colton Caldwell, Grace Hamilton. Colton. I don't. But anyway, and this was, here again, with all due respect to my friend President Carter, he would ask us to look at issues, and we'd look at them, and we would all be unanimous as to our position that we sent back to him. He'd go right the other way. Right the other way.
Jones Lane wasn't with us on
No. But President Carter had the same problem in Washington, in my opinion, that he never was able to work with the General Assembly or with Congress as he was. He did in Atlanta. He had his son with him, and I will forget this. James Sloppy Floyd was chairman of the Appropriations Committee. And I remember that one of Mr. Carter's, Governor Carter's son at that time was maybe 17, 18 years old, and caught Sloppy Floyd in the hall and got him out of shirt collar and said, "Sloppy, Daddy wants to see you downstairs." I mean, Daddy, what? Yeah, Sloppy Floyd never went downstairs. I can tell you. Right there.
What were some of the other battles that were fought around the legislature when you were there?
Well, let me give you let me get you up in the morning. It's in the hotel. It's about 6:15, 6:30. Marcus Collins' room, down the hall from the speakers, and many other legislators in there. And Marcus would start going against hotel rules, but he had an electric skillet in his room. He fried some ham, some sausage, had some toast that he fried in the skillet right behind that. Folks would convene in Marcus's room at about 10 minutes till 7. This big Stetson hat, old coat, and was walking in the door. It's Tom Murphy. And you hold court there for about 45 minutes, not more than an hour. Kind of talking about what you're going to do tomorrow or today, or what you did yesterday. Who got mad at what? But it was very open dialogue. Then the speaker would leave there and he'd come to the Capitol, he'd get out of his car, he's driving, and he'd talk to every doorman, every person that was sweeping in the yards out there at the Capitol that morning, and going into his job. And then he held the court in his office till people want to see him. It's kind of like Senator Talmadge was. You know, if you want to see Senator Talmadge, go to the Capitol about 6:30 in the morning, 6 o'clock. And the speaker the same way. His office door was open. And of course, at 1 minute before 10 o'clock, and Mo Thrash would be in there, and he'd say, run all the guests out of the House chambers. And at 10 o'clock sharp, clap that gavel, and all convening having around, all people take up, everybody take seats, it's all the conversation. You could kind of tell by the rap of that gavel what the tone of the day was going to be. And then, of course, it was time for roll call, and a lot of times the speaker was very stern about making sure that people were there on time, have a roll call, and be a recorded roll call. And you'd see people members kind of running there and recording and trying to run out the door. And the speaker would call for the doorkeepers to close doors and keep them closed, and he'd trap them all in. And then there would be the devotion that would take place on a daily basis. And then you go through the whole process. Well, then, and then when you get down into the budget period of time, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, at 5, the Grand Old Committee would start meeting, and it would be till 9, 10, 11 o'clock, midnight, working on the state budget. And then when It got on down to the lick log about it. I got fussed at a little bit, but of course I cleared it to the speaker. You gotta understand, I served at the pleasure of the speaker. And when the speaker appointed me chairman of the Appropriations Committee, the first thing he told me, he said, now, son, he said, don't think you can take the state budget home with you. In other words, he was telling me that just because I represented one portion of Georgia, that to make sure that I didn't favor that portion of Georgia over the rest of the state of Georgia. And I think he was the same way himself.
Let me read you something and ask you a question. Shortly after Tom Murphy was elected speaker, the Atlanta Journal had this to write about it. Thomas B. Murphy of Freeman, the new Speaker of the House of Representatives, is a small-town lawyer, as was his predecessor, the late George L. Smith of Swainsboro. It's about the only point of resemblance. The speakership was Smith's ambition and obsession most of his political life. Murphy never expected to be Speaker. Murphy, who will be 50 next month, is rough-hewn, rumble in dress, country in speech. Smith was a suave, sophisticated, and became more sophisticated as the years went by. Murphy has a reputation as a firebrand, moody and mercurial in temperament. Smith was low-key all the way. Now I ask you, is that a fair description?
The first part of it is very fair. He was rough, he was dressed, my wife used to want to dress him so bad. I disagree with the fact of him, well, he was a country lawyer, absolutely. Speed reader. Read quick, fast, comprehend, knew what it was, sat through. Smart, very smart. Little country lawyer, yes, over there in Brigham, Georgia. I guess if you could look at his Dun & Bradstreet report, you'd say he's a country lawyer, yeah, right. If you wanted a lawyer in Harrison County area over there, you want to see Tom Murphy. He represented his clients very well. But as far as the allowance of the statement there, when he talked about how dictatorial or whatever it might have been, you never met a person that's more compassionate on a one-on-one basis than Tom Murphy. He had a hard time saying that. He really had a hard time saying that. You got to see example on understanding. I had a friend who, my mother died when I was 12 years old. And my dad was just a clerk in a hardware store. And my neighbors kind of helped raise me. And I had as many meals in Steve Reynolds, who was later a state senator and who was later on the DOT board, in their house as I did in my own house. Steve ran for DOT board. Had a good friend in the house, Doug Whitmire from Gainesville, that was running at the same time. Speaker was for Doug Whitmire. Zell was for Steve Reynolds. Tom Moreland, who was the Commissioner of Transportation at that time, was for Steve Reynolds. Tom Moreland and Tom Murphy weren't the closest of friends either. It's kind of like oil and water. But that being said, sometimes that's good for business when you have that competitive spirit to keeping things in check. Speaker was, of course, counting the votes of the members of the 9th Congressional District on who was going to vote for Doug Whitmire and who was going to vote for Steve Reynolds. Well, I went in to see the Speaker. I was chairman of the House Industry Committee at that time, and the transition was taking place, and I knew that I was being considered as a possible candidate for appropriations if I was reelected the next time. But I told Mr. Speaker, I said, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to vote for Doug, and I've already told Doug that I'm not going to vote for him for the DOT board member. I'm not only gonna vote for Steve, but Mr. Speaker, I'm gonna nominate Steve for the OT board. That's it. Let me tell you why. And I carried him back to when I was 12 years old, and what Steve and Becky Reynolds meant to my family and to me. Steve was my Sunday school teacher in Commerce. He was equally qualified to be a DOT board member as then Representative Doug Whitmire. There wasn't any, I favored him because he was just my friend and lifetime friend. His qualifications for that, he was the chairman of the Transportation Committee in the State Senate. Speaker said, I understand. Never, ever mentioned that to me again. Doug Whitmire won it first time for the unexpired term, then Steve came back and won it the second time. I nominated Steve the second time. Speaker never, ever questioned that. If you had a problem with a piece of legislation, if you knew he had interest in it, and your views were different from his, I can just tell you, no problem. Don't blindside him. Don't make him think that you're for it and then vote the other way. That doesn't work. But if you differ in opinion, he wanted people with different opinions. Yes, he was smart enough to count, and he was smart enough to have his leadership team around him that would, keep him in the spot where he was. But yet he was also understanding enough that he needed to know the other side of the story. And he made himself available for you to disagree with him.
Speaking of Tom Moore, you remember Albert Davis?
Absolutely.
Albert Davis was a friend of yours and mine, and the speakers, and Lieutenant Governor Miller. Well, every time it got, in Albert's view, too far apart, he would sponsor a luncheon at the Commerce Club. And he would invite the speaker and the lieutenant governor and me, because he knew my relationship, lifelong relationship with the lieutenant governor. But we would sit and eat, and at the appropriate time, Albert would say, fellas, this arguing business is hurting now, and you got to stop. And the speaker would say, got no problem with Lieutenant Governor? You just disagree over Tom Moore. The Lieutenant Governor said, got no problem with the speaker. He and I have a little difference there, but we were okay. So we'd leave. By the time they got back to the captain, they'd be talking to reporters saying, that Lieutenant Governor is doing this, or that speaker is doing that.
Well, here again, you've got two presiding officers of two of the branches of the General Assembly. And, there was Speaker Murphy was asked the question all the time again, would you like a camel form of government? And he said, yes, if I can be the unit. That's no problem. And again, you had two leaders that maybe in the eyes of the press and sometimes the eyes of the public, it looked like they were on separate tracks. But ladies and gentlemen, I've sat in that room working out positions on the state budget in the interest of Georgians, and Zell and Speaker Murphy during those times when everybody thought they were like this, they were like that together in the best interest and compromising on issues. And this is not hearsay. I was a witness to it myself, and have walked across the hall with Speaker Murphy many times to sit down in office with then Lieutenant Governor Zell Miller. And the respect for each other was there.
Well, as I was remarking coming up here this afternoon, you do not appoint the son of your enemy as a Supreme and as a Superior Court judge. There is that friendship. Let me read you this. I discovered this in this book, which I hope all of you will read. It's a very good book on Murphy, very accurate book on Murphy. And if you believe in the theory that only opposites attract, then you'll be interested to know that Miller and Murphy are so much alike that it's frightening. And this book captures each of them better than anything that I've ever read. And I want you to hear this. The Murphy-Miller relationship is well documented. It is a cross stitch, endlessly weaving in and out of the two men's lives and careers. There is 8 years differences in their ages, but their heritages are similar. Each was reared in a hardcore Democratic family, revealing the memory of FDR. Each family was anti-poundage and said so. Each enjoyed a headstrong, undisciplined childhood. Each harbored a desire to coach. I failed to mention that Tom Murphy always wanted to be a baseball coach in high school because he was such a good baseball player when he was young. Each came from a family active in local politics, with parents on both sides serving as the mayor of their respective hometown. Each family tree could be traced back to the Georgia General Assembly. Murphy's to the House, Miller's to the Senate. Each of them had a leadership role in the administration of Western Mountains. Each is an obsessive baseball fan. Each one reveres traditional country music. Each one respects Georgia history. Each one cheers for the Georgia Bulldog football team. Each one was and is consumed by the process of politics, enjoying the chase as much as the finish line. These two men also share adjectives such as stubborn, complex, shy, insecure, and ill-tempered. I thought that was very interesting. What do you think?
Very interesting. And very true.
Yes.
Very true. Anybody? Yes, sir.
If Murphy was such a godlike character, why was he defeated in his own district for re-election for the umpteenth time?
Sometimes you stay too long.
He went to well once too often.
Sometimes you stay too long. And that, you know, that's the great thing about the process. If anything, I would say that Speaker's district was deprived because he was Speaker. He probably spent 4 times as much time looking after or worrying about or working for the entire state of Georgia than he did the 18th legislative district. And that can happen to you. His responsibility was that he had to be a part of the entire state, not just the 18th legislative district. Things change, people change. We've seen, I myself, I was defeated. I was defeated as Public Service Commissioner appointed by Zell Miller in a statewide campaign. Statewide votes, over nearly 3 million votes and by 8,000 votes. 8,000 votes is a lot of votes, but in 2.5 to 3 million votes is not a lot of votes. But that was when the swing, Roy Barnes, the Democratic governor of Georgia, was defeated at the same time. There was a big turnover. A lot of people that in the district, in the county that I lived in at that time, which was Forsyth County. I had a business there, still have a business there, but people voted right down the party lines. I could have been Mickey Mouse, but that happens. And I would say that probably, if any one thing, because we selfishly, and I wasn't in the legislature when Mr. Murphy was debating on whether running or not. I didn't want him to run. I wanted him to retire, to move on while he was in office at that particular time. But selfishly for me, as a citizen, I wanted him to run for my interest in Georgia, because I knew what his heart was about. But I wanted for him not to do it. And he decided to do that almost in an instant at a news conference when he was walking. I'm not sure that the speaker, when he got the Capitol that day of that news conference, knew whether he was going to run again or not. I think he made a decision right down the line. But if there's any one ingredient, again, I say to answer your question, I think that his district was neglected because he was Speaker of the House for so many years.
I've also heard that he hated Republicans.
Did.
Well, you know, the state had gone the other way. He didn't have much to do in Scotland.
When you say hated, it resembled that in some degree. I know that people asked when Pierre Howard was lieutenant governor, and Pierre appointed a Republican member to one of the committee chairs, and somebody asked, well, why didn't the Speaker appoint a Republican to one of the committee chairs? And the Speaker, in his wisdom, he said, well, when Newt Gingrich appoints a Democrat to committee chair in Congress, I'll appoint one in the state House of Representatives. And so you can follow those two lines. They were two people just, all that Newt Gingrich didn't appoint anybody a Democrat, and the process doesn't work. When I was appointed chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Johnny Isaacson was on the Committee of Industry, which I was chairman of before I went to Appropriations. When I went to Appropriations, I told Johnny, I said, Johnny, I want you to come to the Appropriations Committee. He said, oh, Speaker's not going to appoint me to Appropriations. I said, Johnny, you're going to have to give up. He appointed me to the Rules Committee, one of the most powerful committees in the House. That's where Johnny Isaacson served. And he was on State Plan, Community Affairs, and Industry. Those were his three committees. And he didn't want to give up either one of them. And I said, but I need you on Appropriations, John. And he said, well, Speaker won't put me on. I said, will you give up one of the committees and come to Appropriations if he'll put you on Appropriations? He said, yeah, I'll do that. I want to see Speaker Miller. I said, Mr. Speaker, I need Johnny Isaacson on Appropriations. He said, are you sure? I said, yes. He said, okay, what committee is going to give up? I told him Industry. Fine, done, just like that.
It was reported, but I don't know if it has been documented, that after Lieutenant Governor Taylor's remarks about Republicans in the legislature, that the Speaker called him over and said, son, you're making a mistake. He said, I went through that, and it ain't worth the fight. And I don't know whether that's ever been.
Well, I know there were Republican members of the House that I served with that were very close to Speaker Murphy, and he treated them very fairly. But there again, it's when you hold that election, the first of each term, it's who's going to be the Speaker and who's going to be the committee chairs and this kind of thing. It's drawn on a party line basis. It's done today. It was done last week the same way, and it'll be done the same way 10 years from now. The point I make that I want to make more than anything out of the whole discussion here today is that I know, regardless of how he presided, regardless how he appeared to the general public from what we now have educational television, which was born in the early 70s, and when it was a 35 millimeter camera, to what it is today, that the Speaker, Murphy, genuinely put the state of Georgia before any of the politics that he was involved in, because he just had the compassion, the love, and the interest, and a vision of the state of Georgia.
Well, you have to be tough to be Speaker, don't you?
You better be.
Exactly.
You gotta be tough in a classroom of 30 kids. But you put 179 Bubba McDonald's that just got elected and think, that I'm on top of the world now. Man, I've been elected to the Georgia House of Representatives, and here I go.
Just 178 of you, what got it.
But, anybody tells you that they got elected to the House of Representatives and their ego didn't kind of kick in a little bit, don't invest your money in it, because they're not telling you the truth. It's just something, and it's an institution that you can't get at Harvard, you can't get at Yale, you can't get at Emory, University of Georgia. You experience it by being in that. And again, it's working with everybody that's like. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna ask, obviously, the Speaker of the House wields a great deal of power, and certainly that was demonstrated throughout Tom Murphy's tenure there. Where, how is that power implemented primarily? Is it through the appointment of the chairs of the various committees? Is that where?
That's your leadership team, yes, sir.
Yeah. And so his influence in terms of the wielding of the power
Correct, sir.
follows that path. Would he take legislators aside personally and talk with them about particular bills, whatever that he had an interest in? Would he do that too?
Not as much as you would think. We would have chairman's meeting every week. We would have a chairman's meeting every Monday morning when all the committee chairmen would come together, and you would discuss the legislative agenda for that week. And everybody was encouraged and free to speak whatever was on their mind about their position on whatever the legislation was. One of the things that when you got down to what was called the Green Door Committee was that I mean, we would really sometimes get into some very heated discussions. But among ourselves, we had an unwritten rule that once we hashed it all out and put our knives back up in our pocket, that we had a unanimous position when we went out of it. We didn't go out there stabbing each other in the back and fussing like that. Our work was done when we really hammered it out. And then if you lost, you lost. But you went out with a unified position to make things go forward the best way. Personalities are interesting. And as a committee chair, when I was chairman of the industry committee, we had a piece of legislation that Governor Busby was very interested in. And it was renewing an office, and we put a sunset on it. And the committee had to pass a bill to extend the life of that office. And we didn't think it was needed anymore. And the speaker backed me as chairman of that committee and my committee for the position that we took. And I was called, and I was invited to the second floor to Governor Busby's office. And Governor Busby says, I want you to get that bill out of the committee. And I said, Governor, we're not going to get that bill out of the committee. I don't have the votes on the committee to get it out, and I'm not interested in it, and we're not going to pass it. He said, I want you to get that bill out. I said, Governor, thank you very much, but we're not going to get that bill out. And Busby took his glasses off and he slung them across the room in the governor's office, and they broke, I don't know how many pieces. And he says, I created a blank thing by executive order if you don't do it. And I said, get your pen out, Governor, we're not going to pass that bill out. I didn't pass the bill out, and he did exactly what he said he was going to do. He created it by executive order.
Well, you know, would you say that Tom Murphy did more for the city of Atlanta than any one person?
A lot of times at our discuss, Marty came up to Keith, and in retrospect, he was probably right. But I was representing my constituents, Carlton was representing his, and it was a big vote on the life of Marty. And it was 90 votes for it. Well, it takes 91 votes for it to be effective. And when that machine was locked and there were 90 votes up there, chair votes aye, wham, bill passes. Marty goes in, dealt with the sales tax is the issue.
You know, he used to say, so goes the city of Atlanta, so goes.
That is correct. And I say that too. I mean, even though I sometimes miss the early morning news to see who got killed in DeKalb County that night or Clayton County, you know, but truly, Atlanta's our capital city. It doesn't belong just to the city of Atlanta. It's our capital city. You and I as Georgians, we've got a tremendous amount invested in our capital city, and it is the economic engine of the Southeast. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Yes.
Question.
From a financial point of view, obviously he came into this world as a poor boy. How is he going out?
Speaker Murphy,
Yes,
if you could go to his home, you would think that you had gone back into the early 50s, and it's a very little simple ranch type house, partially brick, and the molding on the inside, 8-foot ceilings, got a little molding, it's about that wide in the house. Very, very plain, just vanilla. Loved his family. Mr. Speaker, go out with quite an estate. He married well. Miss Agnes's parents had a lot of real estate in the Harrison County area.
this is what I was after, basically.
Sir?
That's basically what I was after.
Yeah, his real estate over there is worth quite a lot of money, but it came from her side. Now, he's been a very successful attorney himself. His practice dealt mostly with workman comp cases. And,
Thank you, Bob. Commissioner McDonald, first I want to say that I grew up in the 18th district and am a native of Freeman, Georgia. Grew up right up the street from Speaker Murphy. Our families were friends, and I have a lot of my own stories about Speaker Murphy. But I was hoping that you might comment on your run for governor, a race in which I believe the nomination ultimately went to Zell Miller.
correct.
And Tom Murphy's influence and motivation behind supporting you for that run.
Probably the most significant part about it is that we were in Governor Miller's office, then Lieutenant Governor Miller's office, one afternoon during the 1989 legislative session. And we were talking about what's going to happen in Georgia and what's going on. And the speaker turned to Zell, and he said, Zell said, now, I'm going to support Bubba, the governor. Said, I just made my mind, I watched him and done all this kind of stuff. So I'm going to support Bubba, but if he doesn't make it, said, I'm going to be supporting you. And that was all that was basically said at that time. Just a very simple, plain conversation. Goes back to my opening remarks. When Tom Murphy told you something, that's, you don't have to run it down and keep polishing it to make sure it stayed bright and shiny, what he said. It was done. That was done. Speaker was a very, very helpful to me in my run for governor. In some lives, he could have been a negative because there were people in the state that saw him as something that he wasn't really what he was, and that would, I'd have people come up to me, Tom Murphy's back, and I'm not going to support you. So that's life. It happens that way. But again, as a candidate for governor, as a member of the Georgia House of Representatives for 20 years, having somebody that you work with, that would stand by you when they thought that you were right and what you were doing and your cause. It's you just don't find that every day of the week. I mean, that's just people that do that. I want to ask you the question about the speaker's position in his last. Did Harrison County feel neglected because he was speaker?
I definitely think.
No, I'm talking a young man back here that lived there.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that the voters in the 18th district had felt neglected for quite some time because, as you said, he had to be involved with everything that was going on in the state. And he had told many of his key folks that he was not going to run. And I truly believe what you and Congressman Call said, that he probably didn't know until right till he went into that news conference whether he was going to run or not. And some of his influential supporters that had supported him for years and years and years turned against him and went for Bill Heath.
Yeah.
And then there was a growing number of ordinances that became part of the 18th district from Paulding County.
And if the speaker, in his role as speaker, wanted to do that district different, he could have done it different, I'm telling you.
He could have.
He did it, he was involved with it, and it was a correct geographical district, made whole, wasn't split in a whole lot of different counties. But in the way, some of the ways that, in reapportionment, things are gerrymandered, I think personally that he had the influence to make the 18th legislative district to run down I-20 from Brigham to Augusta, Georgia, if he really wanted to make the
Right.
18th district that way.
And unfortunately, his intentions were misconstrued as if he were trying to keep a district set up the way he wanted it, when in fact he really was not trying to do that. There were complaints about, the Budweiser plant that went to Cartersville. People began to, at that time, start saying, well, that could have been in Haralson County. He's committed himself to keeping Haralson County rural because he wants to protect his base. And so things that the perceptions out there weren't really the realities, but he eventually caught up with him over time.
After he lost, and I had the time to go visit with him again, I said, Mr. Baker, why did you run? He said, well, son, he called me son, except when he was mad at me, and then he called me Laura. So when the office, I'd get that phone call and say, Laura, come in here, please. I knew it wasn't going to be a fun trip. But if your son need to talk to you, and my office was right around, I'd go through the back corridors in the closet and walk right in the back of his office. But anyway, when I asked him, I said, Mr. Baker, why did you run again? He said, son, said, Roy, i.e. Governor Barnes, Roy's getting a little out of hand as governor. I thought I'd better run again just to keep him in check.
As I understand it, the speaker refused to wear a seatbelt. And I felt, when I had read that that was a very poor example to set for the people who lived in Georgia. What was his reasoning for that?
Couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more, but that's his opinion. And I mean, I'm an old 30-year pilot, and I, pick him up every time. I have a problem, even as a legislator. I had a problem early on, and I used to go out. I was on motor vehicles committee with a convention. It was this little machine, little sled that ride down 25 miles an hour. We hit the bottom of it to show what example why the seatbelt is. I have a problem with the seatbelt law because I felt like that we were continuing to take away the common sense of individuals, and we're making puppets out of people. We tell them when to get up, when to go to bed, what they can eat, what they drink, how they drive, this kind of thing. But then the flip side of that is that it's not just your life in the seatbelt, it's my life meeting you on the road, and if you lose and you slide out of your seat and go and lose your car and wreck somebody else, that was my conversion to supporting the seatbelt law. But in the earlier stages of it, I wanted people to think independently. I'll probably get disagreements in this statement I'm about to make right now. I don't believe in term limits. I don't believe in term limits. I think you're taking away the responsibility of the electorate when John Smith can only serve 2 terms or 4 terms by some statute. I think that you need to be responsible when people put you there. If they want you to stay there a little bit longer, if you're doing a good job, you should be able to. That's just my opinion, and I think it's probably in the minority, but I think, again, when you say you can't serve the 2 terms, then you're relieving the public of their responsibility. Whether you're doing a good job or a bad job, doesn't matter. You can't be there any longer.
But Henry Reeves was sponsor of the seatbelt.
Yes, sir.
Have you ever thought of becoming a Republican? The state has gone from, when we came down here in the mid-sixties, you could find 3 Republicans, Johnny Isaacson, Paul Coverdale, and myself and my wife. That was
Oh,
while I came
You could have been on the speaker's finances.
But, you know, have you ever thought of switching over?
Well, when you say switch, I haven't voted for a Democratic president since Jimmy Carter. I voted for Jimmy Carter the first time. The Democratic Party at the national level it left me. My vote in this past general election looked like a scattergun shot from a shotgun. I'm not going to vote for Pinocchio just because he's a Republican. I'm going to vote for Pinocchio because he's qualified, or she's qualified to do the job that I think needs to be done. And I have been a very, very independent voter. Unfortunately, in Georgia, you have to run as a Republican or a Democrat. When I ran for re-election to the Georgia Public Service Commission as a Democrat, at the same time when Governor Barnes was running as a Democrat for re-election as governor of Georgia, you know what the sweep was. You know what happened in that. Was I not voted for him because I didn't do a good job, wasn't qualified to hold the job? Zell Miller must have thought I was qualified to hold the job because I ran for governor at the same time he did, and then 7 years later he calls me. In the meantime, Johnny Isaacson was in that same race in 1990, and in the mid-90s he called on Johnny to chair the State Board of Education because he wanted Johnny to solve some problems that they were having there. And then when he called me and asked me to come to see him, and I did, and he said he wanted me to serve on the Public Service Commission unexpired term, and I turned him down. He called me back again and said, look, I want you to take this job. I said, I got people knocking my door down, Bubba, to take this job, and you're turning me down. And but I called Johnny and I said, Johnny, what kind of support does Zell give you when he put you on the Board of Education? He said, it's been fantastic. And so I yielded and took the responsibility of the Public Service Commission, did what I call an independent job from a standpoint. But Zell was a Democrat governor that appointed me to the Public Service Commission, and I felt like that I had an allegiance to run again under the Democratic label, which I did, and wasn't successful, turn the page and move on.
Tell us a little bit about serving on the Public Service Commission. These days it's kind of hard to sort out the politics on the Public Service Commission.
Maybe I ought to do that in private quickly. This is about Tom Murphy today. I'll be glad after the clock ticks the program here to discuss that. But I don't want to be talking about Bubba McDonald, Public Service Commissioner, when I'm really here as a guest to talk about the longest serving speaker in the nation, Tom Murphy. But I'll be glad to answer that question for you.
Other questions?
I did want to ask, and I assume that Speaker Murphy was very well informed concerning all proposed legislation. Did he actually read, digest all the bills?
No, sir. No, sir.
How did that work?
2,000 bills and those other responsibilities. I've only known 3 people in the General Assembly myself that read every bill. One of them was Benson Ham, one of them was Robin Harris, and the other one was Denmark Rubin. Do you know anybody else called? That literally read every piece of legislation. Benson Ham was noted for changing grammatical errors. He would come to a bill and he'd wear the flow out, changing grammatical errors where there was a typo or something like that. But he caught it. He caught it.
Going to Orange, you mean close.
Well, I never did serve in the House of Floyd. But the bills had captions, and Speaker would read those captions. Of course, it was his responsibility to assign them to committee. And of course, just in the simple caption of the bill, a lot of times would dictate if it was a piece of local legislation, it went to state plan community affairs. If it dealt with the revenue of the state, it went to ways and means. If it dealt with the expenditure of the state, it went to appropriations. And, no, sir, he didn't revisit that. But you got, again, all those people out there, and you take that well down there, when you go in that well of that house, you better go in there with some bit of knowledge and solid ground, because you can get blistered down there. If you go down there and try to smooth something over on somebody, there's somebody out there that knows a lot more about what you're talking about than you do. So you gotta be careful with how you approach that. But Speaker was, as I said, he was a quick reader, and of course he knew the rules. You know, you can be a presiding officer, and if you know the Robert's Rules of Order or the rules of the House, and you make quick judgment decisions. But even that, and I saw the speaker. My seat was right down the very front, and I saw the speaker with a Republican representative from DeKalb County. Really just blistered him. Speaker blistered him pretty bad on parliamentary procedural, and in fact it made the speaker so mad he turned his gavel over to Speaker Pro Tem and walked out and went to his office. Well, I'm one of those committee chairs that's supposed to kind of, help calm the waters, and I just got up out of my seat and went right back in the office with him. And he sat down at his desk, and I looked at him and I said, Mr. Speaker, you were wrong. Chester Morton was the guy's name. I said, you were wrong, Mr. Speaker. You shouldn't have, you were wrong on what you did. He never said a word to me. He got back up, went right back into the rostrum, went right back into the speaker's chair, took the gavel again, and apologized to Chester Morton.
That says a lot about the man.
He saw his error, but it took that team that he built upon to have to somebody to tell it just like it was, And when he sat down in his chair, he realized that. He realized that. And he has so much respect for the 179 other members of that House and its independence, which, again, ladies and gentlemen, is so good for Georgia when you have that legislative independence from the executive branch, and that's what our forefathers put together for you. You got the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, and they need to stay independent of each other to make the democracy run.
How many committees are there in the House, and how are they determined how many there are? Who controls the number and size?
Each body establishes its own committee. I don't know how many are there now. We had about 28 committees.
But the speaker has that big a say-so does the speaker have in determining the number of committees? He appoints the chairman, I believe.
That is correct, sir. You create a new committee through the Legislative Services Committee. And if you want to split industry and tourism, have a tourism committee and have an industry committee. Well, I'm sorry, I do not know the present makeup because there's been a lot of changes made. But we had industry and tourism was under one committee, and you can use the committee process to expand your base, I guess you might say. But it can also be too many to be productive. And I think the speaker was always very concerned about not having too many committees.
All right, but once he decides how many committees there's going to be, then that's it. No one else votes on it.
No, sir.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
We have 159 counties. We have 179 people in the House of Representatives. Isn't that too many?
180 members of passing. I would say, Mr. Speaker, is one person, then there are 179 members.
But, isn't that too big to make it, representative? you know, that they get anything done, there's so many people, so many counties, 159 counties, 159 sheriffs, 159 superintendent schools and all the rest. It seems to me it used to be a bureaucracy.
I agree with you, I think there's too many too, but let me tell you what, go down here to Blairsville and say you're gonna consolidate Hiawassee and Blairsville and you're gonna put the courthouse in Young Harris. Those are the ones that are in charge of that, not the General Assembly of Georgia. Consolidation of government services is done locally. And the area that I represented for years, Jefferson was the county seat, there was Commerce, and there were about 7 municipalities in that one little county. 3 school systems. Then there's Banks County right above, it's courthouse. Banks County would consolidate with Jackson County, the courthouse could be in Banks County. Jackson County would consolidate with Banks County, the courthouse could be in Jefferson. But they ain't gonna put it on the county line down there. Not gonna happen. Not in my lifetime. The only thing that I think is going to consolidate counties. I will qualify this as another opinion from here. Is when the General Assembly provided the local option sales tax for schools. Because you have counties that do not have any shopping district in it at all, that still exist, and they have the sheriff, they have the superintendent, they have all that. They buy all their groceries and their hardware and their clothes and automobiles in the adjacent county, but yet they have to pay ad valorem tax to support those schools. It's when the pocketbook rubs the wall for the county seat, somewhere like that. That's when things will change.
We can't even have a jail in conjunction with Union County. That criminals have been involved, I guess, but, you know, it seems ridiculous.
Well, you know, we all have to, and I never will forget Dean Tate was Dean of Men at the University of Georgia. And Dean Tate said to him, to me, the greatest challenge that he had was change itself. And that's something that we all have to, that's what I always admired Speaker Murphy about. He looked not at the short side, but he looked at the long side of Georgia and what was going to be best for that first grader going into those schools. And his commitment to the technical schools and for those education facilities to be one within 50 miles of everybody that wanted to go to school somewhere and advanced education for their economic benefit. And you have people that are willing to sit on just what's good right now, but holding that bonding program for the state of Georgia and the AAA bonding capacity wasn't just for us today, it's for tomorrow's, and it's just saved our state millions and millions of dollars in interest. And I can't, and of course, again, there was the Zell Millers involved in it, there was the governors involved in it, there were a lot of people involved in it, but don't take Tom Murphy out of the picture, because he was very, very much a player with authority, again, loved children and wanted to make sure that the elderly were taken care of, for those that had taken care of him when he was coming up and looked after and asked to make sure that they had a heart of God. Had a heart of God. Wouldn't believe it. Wouldn't believe it if you never knew him anywhere except on television. But I'd fight for him. Guarantee you that any day in the week.
Well, you heard what Representative McDonald thinks of the speaker. Let me just take a minute to tell you what some other great public officials have said about it. George Busby, you know, is our former governor, described Tom Murphy as being a man with a tender heart who provided strong leadership through an ever-changing times that helped make Georgia a progressive state that is fiscally sound, which is what Representative McDonald said. Senator Zell Miller saw him as a man who has been in the center of almost everything that has happened good in Georgia politics over the past 4 decades. Jimmy Carter has said Tom Murphy is Georgia politics. The late Senator Herman Talmadge called him the most stable force in state government. And believe it or not, Atlanta Journal-Constitution political writer Tom Baxter says that Tom Murphy is the one who has defined the character of Georgia. Thank you, Bubba. We're glad to have you here. Let's give him
Now I'll answer your question.
Oh, okay, go
That's
ahead.
not, you can leave if you want to.
Please do.
What was the question again? I know it dealt with Public Service Commission.
Just tell us a little bit about the Public Service Commission. It's hard from the media these days to get a general impression of what's going on and who's for what and all of that.
Zell Miller, when Zell asked me to fill an unexpired term, he said, let me tell you about what I'm looking for. He said, I'm looking for somebody that's had a successful business career that knows how to operate and run a business. Unfortunately, I've had that. And he said, I'm looking for somebody that understands the state of Georgia's preferred legislative experience. And he said, that's why I want you to do this job. Well, I accepted the responsibility of the job and thoroughly enjoyed my time on the Public Service Commission. I got there at the time with gas deregulation. I had nothing to do legislatively with gas deregulation. Then Senator Sonny Perdue is the one that introduced the gas deregulation bill in the state of Georgia. I got there in June, and implementation was to take place by the Public Service Commission in September. We had 19 different markers. The Constitution that sets up the Public Service Commission, they are responsible for the monopoly industries of the state, the utility industries of the state, and also responsible for the consumer. It's twofold. The press makes it sound like that you're only responsible for the consumer, and if you do anything for a utility, then you're against the consumer. During my time on the commission, 4.5 years, I had 2 rate cases of the Georgia Power Company, and over a 6-year period of time, reduced rates by almost $1 billion for the ratepayers of Georgia. Georgia ratepayers, as far as the Georgia Power is concerned, is paying less on a per kilowatt basis today than they were in 1991. And you go back, look how much your newspaper was in 91, look how much your milk was in 91, look how much your gas was in 91, and yet we've got to buy. But the law requires Georgia Power. This is what the Public Service Commission has to do. The law requires Georgia Power a proper return on equity. The investors that put their money, the stockholders into that company, they are guaranteed a rate of return. Now, the commission comes in there to help referee if all the expenses that have come into play are proper, which sets the rate of return. If the Public Service Commission sets a rate of return that the company itself feels like is not adequate, then they can appeal it to a superior court in Fulton County. And there has not been a case that has been appealed that wasn't ruled in favor of the utility if the commission does not adequately do its job. The commission at the time when I was there, we do not, and gas was deregulated. We don't have anything to do with the price of natural gas. It's been deregulated. That's what deregulation is. It's taken it away from the regulatory process. But yet, we've dealt with it, and of course the gas price at the well just went out the top. Many reasons why. Because of the climate and environmental controls, utilities were going to natural gas for generation of electricity. Whether it's peanuts, whether it's sorghum syrup, or whether it's natural gas. The demand and the supply is going to go with the price. We've seen oil prices today down $52 a barrel now, and gas prices, and I saw a pump the day before yesterday, $1.99 now.
Where?
in coming. But you know, then that same station last year, it was $2.30 or something like that. And of course, oil was $80 a gallon, $80 a barrel then. So you've got these things that work in those different directions. Congress in Georgia deregulated telecom. We just lost, and all due respect to the gentleman that's elected to the Public Service Commission, the Republican candidate. I'm sure he's a great guy and will do well. But they lost one of the finest, knowledgeable people in the telecommunications business with David Burgess, who's an Afro-American that graduated from Georgia Tech, was offered a professional baseball scholarship, didn't want to do it, came to work for the Georgia Public Service Commission as a staff person, worked in the telecom division, became director of the telecom division over years, knows more about the telephone and telecom industry than all of us in this room put together. And Governor Barnes, there was a vacancy created, and Governor Barnes even asked me, he said, do you know somebody? And I recommended David Burgess, and others recommended David Burgess, and he appointed David to the commission. And my personal views, Georgia lost, because the telecom industry is a whole different ballgame, ladies and gentlemen. It changes what we see today in the telecom industry is obsolete because it's already been changed for tomorrow. It's not like natural gas and electricity. Natural gas hadn't changed. It's the same thing it was when it first had that first well. And electricity hasn't changed. The delivery and all those type things are different, but the product itself is the same thing. You follow the money line with gas and electricity. You can't follow the money line with technology because it's so complicated in how it meshes together with everything else. And I just as an individual, I just think that we lost some tremendous talent in David Burgess, and John over here, I'm sure will attest to that, because he just has the knowledge of it. He's been working in it all his adult life, and don't have to worry about David. David can go to work with one of the telecom companies and make 3 times what he's making on the Georgia Public Service Commission. But he was just dedicated to his job there. But it's a very volatile. You got to make some tough decisions, and you have to do it. You depend on a lot of staff work, crunching numbers and bringing them to you, and it takes in my opinion, you get scolded sometimes if you talk to a person with Georgia Power that's in their technology field or in their finance field. But I never did want to make a decision on my thoughts only alone. I wanted to talk to people that were experts, that lived with it, and I got different opinions. I would talk with industry, i.e. the purchasers, the textile people, or the big industries and the gravel business and the crushing business that use a lot of electricity. But the commission has always put the consumer at the very, very top and got the best rates to the consumers. And like I said, I had 2 rate cases when I was chairman of the Public Service Commission, and both of them were rate reductions. But you can't, and by Georgia law, if they can prove that if it's costing them more, fuel costs have gone up, then they have a right to recover that fuel cost. And that's in the law. It's not all the commission has to do is to decide if the numbers are correct, that they show that it costs them. They have to abide by the law. Well, unfortunately, in the state legislature, among the 180 people in the House and 56 in the Senate, you're going to have people that are going to take the high road, and they're not going to take the responsible road. They're going to take the politically popular road. You know, it's not fun to vote for a utility increase. It is not fun, but sometimes it's responsible. Sometimes we didn't have blackouts in Georgia like they did in California, then what are they paying in California for utility rates? We haven't had blackouts in Georgia like they had at Con Edison in New York. You know, I'm a proponent of nuclear energy. I think it's got to come. It's the cheapest, it's the cleanest, it's the best you can have. But it ain't popular with everybody. I thought the Sierra Club and can't even talk about things like that, you know, because it's bad. But people live next door to it in France and Japan and everywhere, and we've had no exposure with nuclear problems in years because technology has changed so much. And I just don't want to burden my two grandsons with a lot of financial responsibility that maybe I could have been taken care of. So, one final word. 5 months after Zell appointed me to the Public Service Commission, I'd gone through that first round of gas deregulation. I met him in his office. I said, Governor, just figured out why you wanted me to serve on the Public Service Commission. He said, why is that, Bubba? I said, you just getting evil when you're running against the government.